All right, it's 1 o'clock. Let's go and get started. All right, good afternoon, everyone. How's everyone doing today? Doing all right, all right. All right, so last time you all were here, we took the midterm exam. So I haven't looked at them yet, but I am planning to grade them probably starting tomorrow. Maybe finishing up on Monday so I can get that back to you guys by next Tuesday. So come to class next Tuesday, then I'll have the exams ready for you at that point. Okay. Besides that, we have another assignment due this Sunday, which is the individual case study. So make sure you guys are working on that. Remember, it's not it's not supposed to be as long as the group project. I did cut a lot of the topics, or not a lot of topics, a lot of the sections from the individual one. So make sure you're reading the rubric in terms of knowing kind of what to write for. Okay, and that is due this Sunday. Okay, so another announcement I have to make. So for your final project, I think a lot of the groups have reached out to me at this point. So I think I have 7 groups that have already kind of been settled, and your topics have been chosen. I'll send an updated list of the topics that have been chosen today after class. But if you don't have a group yet, definitely let me know. I know a few people have already reached out to me saying that they want to make group. So I'll assist with that. So I think tomorrow what I'll do is that, for everyone that hasn't contacted me, all the groups that haven't contacted me by tomorrow, I'll be reaching out and probably forming the groups for the last few people in the course. Okay. All right, so definitely look forward to that. So if you have a group right now, but you're still deciding on a topic, definitely let me know ASAP. Send me an email as soon as you guys agree on a topic. Just so I can kind of reserve for you guys and know who still needs group. Okay. All right. So the plan for today, we're getting back onto ethics today, and so we're going to be talking. We're going to go back to talk about safety and risk. Okay. So we started talking about that a little bit last Thursday, and then we're just kind of picking up where we left off from there. Okay. All right. Any questions I can answer before we get started for today? Okay. All right. So let's go and get started. Okay. So let's start today. We're talking about just risk and safety in general. Okay. So, if you go to any engineering company's website, you go to their mission statement, whatever, you'll see that every company will say that safety is their top priority, right? Part of the business of doing engineering, part of the business of having a company that markets these products is that you have to have the trust of your consumers that your product is going to be safe. All right. The last thing anyone wants to do when they're using an engineering product is to have harm come to them, right? So it makes sense that for the most part, any engineering company will prioritize health and safety of their customers. Okay. And so what that means for you as the engineers that work for these companies, it is your professional responsibility to ensure that the people who use your products, use your services, are going to be safe. Now, I say that most engineering companies will say that safety is their top priority. Whether or not it actually is another story, which you guys will find out when you do your case studies. But In theory, that should be the number one. Okay. And so last time, we kind of introduced these concepts in terms of how we view risk, what is exactly the engineer's responsibilities and so on. Okay. So the thing I want to start with today is kind of a almost like a little bit of a framework to kind of help guide and make your products as safe as possible. Okay. Okay. So of course, this framework, and I put it kind of in finger quotes here, is very general. The exact procedure that you follow to ensure safety is going to be different depending on the field, depending on the company that you work for. But most kind of protocol, most safety protocols kind of have these general steps. Maybe in different orders, maybe kind of more specific or not. But these are kind of some of the checks that you're going to have to go through in pretty much any engineering company. Okay? All right. First thing you have to make sure to do is that your products comply with any applicable laws. I guess I should be more specific. Safety laws. So like we discussed last time, the government has a responsibility to kind of ensure the safety of its citizens. And part of that is by imposing or regulating, technology and engineering products just in general. And so there's always going to be some kind of laws that kind of dictate, how you should design your product, some standards that it must follow, so on and so forth. Okay. So, and of course, if your business or if your company plans on doing business in multiple different countries, then that's multiple layers of different laws that you have to comply with, right? Of course, that mostly has to do with kind of some digital platforms. So social media, things like that, they have to comply with not only US laws, but also the laws of all the companies that they operate in. Okay. If you're a global company like Apple, that means you have to comply with laws as well, right? I think there was a case recently where like Apple switched their chargers from Lightning cables to USB-C in part because the European Union basically forced them to do that, right? So this is kind of something that you have to the first thing that you have to do, because if your products don't follow the laws of the country, then it's within the country's rights to ban your company from doing business in that country. Okay. So number one is to comply with all safety laws. All right, number two. Number two is to comply with what's considered to be accepted engineering standards. So not only are there laws that your company has to comply with, but we talked about last time that the professional engineering societies like IEEE, AIAA, ASME, right? These societies also put forth standards that the work should follow, right? And so if you're going to be, and the reason those standards exist is to, first and foremost, protect the safety and health of the regular person, right? Okay. Usually speaking, these professional engineering standards are a bit more stringent than the laws, right? Um, they're also a lot more nimble than the laws as well, because if you to make a new law or to adjust a law, you know, probably everyone here knows that it's a very cumbersome process. Government is not exactly known for moving swiftly on things. But the professional engineering societies, they're much more much smaller, and it's much easier for them to kind of change standards based on kind of an evolving technology, right? So these are usually a bit more difficult to follow. Okay. I say usually, but sometimes sometimes some laws may be kind of archaic and kind of old and rigid, where those are kind of hard to comply with as well. But you want to make sure that you do this too. Okay. For those of you who are writing about the Pinto, so the Pinto is actually one classical case where the car that Ford designed in the Pinto actually did comply with all the safety laws, and so they were able to kind of get approval from the government regulatory agency, but it wasn't up to date with professional engineering codes at the time, which led to all these disasters. Okay. Um, and so, that's always something to kind of keep in mind, that, these standards are often changing much more quickly than laws. And so part of your responsibility as an engineer is to keep track of these and stay up to date with them, any changing standards. All right. So no matter what kind of company you work for, no matter what kind of project you do, you're going to be doing steps 1 and 2, no matter what, right? And so you're basically not allowed to sell a product if it doesn't comply with the laws or doesn't comply with engineering standards. 3 and 4 are kind of more suggestions, and they're obvious in what they state, but how much you actually pursue these is kind of dependent on your company, right? So 3 is an obvious one, is to explore potentially safer designs. Okay. So this kind of more has to do with if you're getting put on a legacy project, maybe a product line that has come out over decades or so, right? And so usually when you're on such a legacy project, things have been done a certain way for so many years, just because that's just how it's always been done. But usually when technology improves, there's probably a better way to do it. And so to explore those potentially safer designs, to do things in a different way to improve safety is always worth checking into. So I'll call these kind of out of the box solutions, or outside the box. Those two have kind of different connotations. So of course, no one wants to hear this, right? So if you're the company and you have this kind of young upstart engineer come in and say, I think we can redesign this whole thing. No one wants to hear that because it's a lot of work to redesign something, especially a product that people kind of have expectations for, a legacy project like that. And what you'll find out, if you haven't, realized already, is that legacy is very powerful in engineering. I just to kind of give you it's not quite doesn't quite have to do with safety, but I work with a lot of computational codes. That's kind of some of the research that I do. I'm literally still using some code bases that were written in the 70s, just because people don't want to update it. They don't want to. No one wants to rewrite the whole code, just because it's going to be a huge undertaking, and the code from the 70s still works. And I put works in quotation mark because it kind of works, but it's getting a lot harder to make it work every day. So legacy is a very powerful thing, but if it has to do with some safety, or if it's going to make a significant impact on risk, then it's always worth at least considering. All right, number four. Number four is to predict potential misuses of your product. Okay. And so I think, as engineers, we kind of fall into this fallacy a lot, where like we design something for people to use, and you kind of have to do it in a kind of very specific way in order to get it to work, right? For anyone that's kind of worked on code or any kind of digital project, you kind of understand what I'm talking about, right? You design an app and it's designed to be used kind of one way. But you have to keep in mind that the people using your product are not going to have the same level of knowledge that you do about how it works. And so they're going to, use the product in the way that they think is best. Maybe they kind of, use a workflow or use a different way of using it that they're familiar with. Maybe they're kind of, using a different kind of workflow from another product and putting it here, right? And so that's going to cause some issues, right? And so something that's always important to do is to kind of predict this and think about, how, where are my customers coming from? What are some ways that they might think that they can use the product, but might lead to something else, right? And you'd be surprised. And so no matter how much thinking that you do about this, you'll always be surprised if, someone using their car or someone using an elevator, like, what? Like they push that button? It's like, why would they push that button? And so, but it's always good to think about, because one small mistake or one small misstep, and someone's life may be in danger, right? And in cases like this, it's as kind of as engineers, kind of sometimes we get a little bit defensive and say that, like, oh, it's not our fault. The customer just used it in the wrong way, or that's not what we intended. But that's that may be true to some degrees as well. But just thinking about what could happen, and thinking about just the ways that people may misuse it is always good to know. Okay. Because you may think that something's very obvious, but when you're put in front of a judge and a jury, in terms of why did you design it this way, and it becomes a little bit of a harder question to answer when you're in that situation. So you want to kind of avoid putting yourself in that situation as much as possible. All right, any questions on any of this? Okay. All right, so this kind of gives you a rough framework, and of course, these steps are all extremely vague, because how you actually implement these is dependent on your project. But these are kind of four things to kind of always keep in mind, when you're designing a product. Okay? Especially for those of you that are, I think some of you are probably finishing up senior design this semester, or for those of you that are getting into senior design next year, these are important to know. Okay. Let's talk about risk a bit more. So, we talked about last Thursday about how, it's practically impossible to eliminate all risk in a situation, right? Someone just walking outside their house puts themselves at risk, right? So when you're designing your engineering products for health and safety, right? The goal is not to eliminate all risk as possible, but to try to manage it, and minimize as much as possible. Okay. So today, we're going to be talking about the idea of acceptable risk, and then how we kind of define that in different contexts. Right. So just in short, a risk is deemed acceptable just, when the customer, or when the engineer, or when the people involved just kind of acknowledge that it's there, and kind of accept the fact that bad things may happen, but they still kind of go through with whatever they wanted to, because they think that that risk is worth it. Okay. Okay. So that's how we define acceptable risk, or that's what we, say is acceptable, right? So you know that the risk is there, but you think it's worth taking anyway, right? Because of maybe the good that you're going to get from it, from the convenience that you're going to get from it, for whatever the reason. Okay. The tricky thing about acceptable risk is that, how risk is assessed, and how we deem it acceptable or not depends on, not only the framework in terms of, how you're thinking about the risk, but also the parties involved as well, right? Because when you're talking about health and safety of people, it's a lot of different parties are involved, right? Not only are the engineers and the customers involved, but also, governments are involved as well. We just touched on that a little bit in terms of laws. And so how all these different parties view risk, and what they deem as acceptable is interesting. And part of your role as an engineer is to kind of navigate this kind of complicated space to make sure that all parties are kind of happy and accept the risk. Okay. And so, over the next, probably 30 minutes or so, we'll talk about kind of, different frameworks, different points of view, and how that affects our perception of risk. Okay. All right, so let's start with kind of a general moral theory. So, last Tuesday, I think it was, we went over this concept known as utilitarianism. And so let's talk about utilitarianism and what's deemed acceptable within that framework. Okay. So just to kind of refresh your memory, utilitarianism is a moral theory or moral framework that's aimed at maximizing the well-being of society as a whole. So under utilitarianism, we want to bring as much good to as many people as much as possible. So it's almost like a scorekeeping kind of a way of thinking about it, or like a like a score to think about, right? Especially when you think about kind of how a risk is deemed acceptable from this framework. Okay, so under this framework, a risk is acceptable. Okay. So under utilitarianism, a risk is worth taking if the product of the probability and magnitude of the harm is equal to or exceeded by um, the product of the probability and the benefit. Okay, it's a lot of words. Let me put it in a mathematical form. So we almost kind of have this kind of mathematical equation here. So if we take the product of the probability of the harm, okay, and we multiply that by the magnitude of the harm, okay, if this is less than or equal to the probability of the benefit occurring, multiplied by the magnitude of the benefit. Okay? And the magnitude of the benefit can be multiplied by however many people it affects. Okay? So it's like a numbers game, I guess. I guess that's probably a better way to put it, right? All right. So one way that this equation kind of gets balanced here is by considering the number of people involved, right? If you remember when we talked about utilitarianism last week, kind of the other part of utilitarianism is to maximize the well-being of society as a whole at the cost of certain individuals, right? And so by playing kind of the numbers game of kind of limiting the harm to a small group of people and making sure the benefits the vast amount of people, then this equation kind of works out the way it does. Okay. Okay. That's typically how the utilitarianism arguments go, right? You're kind of just strictly playing just a numbers game. Okay. So this framework or this way of thinking can be useful in some cases, right? Sometimes it is just a numbers game, right? And so if you think about I think a lot of people think of taxes in this way, right? And so a lot of people think that for those that have a lot of wealth, they could be harmed a little bit more just so that more people can benefit, right? So there are some things where this frame of thinking may make sense, but obviously this way of thinking can also be very problematic as well, right? Okay. It can be problematic for the sense because not all harms and not all benefits can you put like an exact number value, right? Okay. So, the kind of the biggest example here, the biggest elephant in the room is the price of a life, right? Because a lot of times, when things go wrong for an engineering product, it's going to cost someone or a group of people their life, right? Think about, like the Ford Pinto, or everything that's going on with Boeing right now, right? So how do you put a price in someone's life? You really can't. It's priceless. Right? Okay. Now that doesn't stop people from doing so. For those of you who've kind of started looking into the Pinto, you'll see that they did do that, and so they basically quantified the price of a human life based on maybe the medical fees that the family will have to pay, or maybe the cost of a lawsuit if they get sued over it, right? So people will try. That doesn't make it morally right, but sometimes that does happen. Okay. So obviously this framework here has a lot of limitations, and it's problematic for a lot of ways, but it is kind of useful to think about for some, I would say, more minor kind of harms and more minor benefits. Okay. It's kind of a more straightforward way to think about risk and if it's acceptable or not. All right. Any questions on this? Okay. All right. Let's talk about the public's approach, okay, or public perception. So one thing that you have to understand kind of when you're working in an engineering company, there are risks and there are things that you as an engineer are very keenly aware of because you work on a project, right? The public generally does not have your same level of technical knowledge. They especially don't have your level of depth of knowledge of the product that you're using themselves. Right? And so what the public perceives as risky, what the public perceives as, dangerous to them, can be oftentimes very vastly different than what it actually is, based on what the engineer understands. Okay. And this is kind of further complicated, just kind of based on just how news media just kind of operates nowadays, where everything is kind of reaction based and everything is kind of very doom and gloom everywhere. So a lot of things, the news may cover something that seems very risky, very dangerous, but that may only represent kind of a small portion of things. Okay. And what kind of further complicates this is this idea of anchoring. it's this idea that the first impression that you have of something of a particular experience or a particular technology, whatever your first experience is going to be, that's going to kind of color everything that's going to be the lens that you kind of view things with, kind of for the rest of your life. Right? Okay. Even when you present these people with kind of evidence that kind of contradicts that, they're still going to kind of hold on to that initial impression. It's only after kind of a lot of work, a lot of kind of conscious, deliberate work do people kind of overcome their initial perception of things. Okay. And so that's kind of one thing that you have to kind of remember too, is that when you're kind of introducing a new technology or a new product to people, you want to make sure that your first impression is always good, just so that people kind of anchor onto that. Okay. Another thing to keep in mind is that even though as engineers designing a product, we kind of differentiate between what is a risk and what is an acceptable risk, right? The public doesn't really see it that way. So the public sees that if something is risky, then it's risky, right? Doesn't matter if it's an acceptable risk, doesn't matter if it's a minor risk. A risk is a risk. Okay? Yeah.
An example of something that when first released was very negatively accepted or performed poorly and actually had a big turnaround.
Yeah. I would say Ford just in general. So I think for a long time, yeah. So Ford, I mean, the Pinto thing kind of, I almost said blow up, but that was a little bit too on the nose. But that was kind of all over the news for the longest time. And if you think about Ford today, they've really kind of turned their whole image around. And so it took them a very long time. But I think a lot of people today, especially a lot of the younger generation, outside of engineering, don't really know what happened with Pinto back then. And so, Ford has really kind of done a really nice job of that. Whereas, before maybe people didn't drive too many cars or they didn't really think too much of Ford, but kind of seeing all that in the news with the Pinto, really kind of put people on the back foot a lot. But they've kind of really come a long way since then.
I think I said before that too, obviously 7 months before. But,
yeah.
I guess my question is more if something that's like initial launch of some company is pretty catastrophic, is that pretty hard to come back from?
Yeah, I mean it's a case by case basis, I guess. I mean some companies never really recover for it. Like we talked about the Segway kind of before spring break. That one never really kind of recovered from it. Even though there is some potential there, I think you're kind of seeing a little bit of a resurgence of that a little bit with the hoverboards. Kind of redesigned in another package. But yeah, a lot of times, especially if there's, if the product kind of depends on selling kind of a high volume of things, then that public perception and how people perceive it is going to be a really big factor in its success. Yeah. Although usually for some things like that, if it does have a catastrophic launch, people will try to bring it back kind of many, many years later after people have kind of forgotten about it. And so that's kind of, you're kind of seeing that cycle with some products like the Segway and the hoverboards and things like that. So, yeah. All right. So what can you do as engineers, right? So what is a way to kind of ensure that not only the public kind of not only perceives your product well, but also, accepts the fact that there is risk associated with it. So the best way to do that is to obtain consent for it, right? So to kind of inform, kind of just be upfront, tell your customers kind of what the risks are associated with your product, and then have them kind of, understand it and then accept it. So, you guys are probably familiar with this. If you download any app on your phones, or even, just you're booting up your phone for the first time, there's that terms of use, the end user license agreement that no one ever reads because it's full of legalese. But the initial intent, the purpose of these things is to provide, free and informed consent for your customers, right? So that's one way to do it. Okay. You can also, another way that people kind of accept the risks of things is to kind of partner with the government to provide, to require things like licenses, things like certifications for using certain types of engineering products. And so part of the licensing process, or part of the certification process, is to take some courses in terms of best practices, in terms of, telling what's the safest way to use these things. To drive a car in America, everyone has to pass a driving test, right? So that involves going to driving school, learning about the laws, practicing kind of safe driving techniques, right? So in doing so, as part of that process, you understand kind of the risks involved with driving a car, and also kind of the best ways to kind of keep yourself safe. Okay. And so as long as people kind of understand kind of the safe way to use things, that's going to affect how they deem things as acceptable. Okay. Okay. Another important aspect of acceptable risk in the public is to make sure that, whoever, whatever party of people is kind of taking on the risks, those are also the people that are kind of reaping the benefits of the practice as well. So it's not really fair if you use a particular product, or you do something, you're kind of putting yourself at risk, but then someone else gets the benefit, right? So if you're going to be putting yourself at risk, you should be the one getting the benefit, getting the convenience or compensation or whatever that is. Okay, so kind of taking all of this into account, we can come up with a definition for acceptable risk in terms of the public. Okay. And so the first factor is to make sure that this risk is assumed under free and informed consent. Okay. Those who assume the risk are properly compensated or properly they get the benefits. And those cases where the risks are properly and justly distributed. So these are kind of the main factors that have to do with kind of public perception and assumption of risk. All right, any questions on this? Okay. All right. Let's talk about another important party, which is the government regulators. Okay. So the government plays another very important role in terms of ensuring the safety and health of people who use anything really, not just engineering products, right? And so the main ways that government regulators do this is by imposing laws to make sure that everything is safe for people to do. Okay, so the legislators and the governing bodies that are responsible for these, they have a certain kind of mindset that's used to determine whether things are risky or not. So the role that the government regulator plays is actually very important, right? Everyone always says that that they put the health of the public first and foremost, right? But if you think about kind of the motivations for a government regulator versus an engineer, even the best engineers for certain companies, at the end of the day, those engineers are still employees of that company. So not only are they invested in the health and safety of their of their customers, but they're also invested in the kind of financial success of the company as well. Okay. A government regulator is someone that's not invested, and so they don't really care about the company's success. Their number one and only priority, or at least they should be on the health and safety of the public. Okay. that's the idea anyway, right? So have kind of an unbiased, kind of third-party person kind of, make the interest of the public first and give them the power to impose rules on these companies where, they have kind of maybe other incentives to not do that. At least that's the idea. Okay. All right. So in general, right, whoever is the government regulator and kind of what their attitude is, it plays a very big role in terms of how risk is evaluated, right? We can kind of categorize the government's role or the government's mindset for risk management into two kind of different categories. The first kind of approach is a more of a reactive approach. And so under the reactive approach, the government regulator will kind of let the companies kind of explore their technology, develop their technology. And if something goes wrong or if things start to show bad signs, then they'll kind of react and impose laws to kind of stop them. Okay. Okay. So it's basically, wait for something to happen before you write a rule about it. Okay. So of course, companies love this. So companies love, not being able to kind of do what they want and not have any regulators come in and tell them what to do. But of course, this kind of mindset exposes the public to a lot of unknown risks. Oftentimes what you'll kind of hear in the news is that companies often hire lobbyists, and so that's those are people that go to these regulatory agencies and kind of encourage them to take a more reactive approach to let the company kind of do what they want, and then if something happens, then they make a law for it. Okay? The other approach that they can take is a proactive approach. Okay. And so with the proactive approach, the government agency in this case doesn't wait for something to happen. They write a law to kind of prevent any kind of risk that may occur. Okay. So of course, this approach here is better for the public, right? And so laws are written, before anything happens, so it minimizes risks. But of course, this causes a lot more expenditure in terms of time and money, not only for the companies, but also for the governments to go and kind of enforce these laws as well. Wait a second.
Couldn't that be potentially overdoing it?
Of course, yeah, of course. And so, a lot of times, a lot of proactive laws are they're written in based on kind of predictions or kind of data that may show one thing, but that prediction may not come true. And so, a lot of times, proactive laws they may cause a lot of problems, a lot of issues that may not have been something to begin with, right? And that's kind of always the tug of war between these two things, where on the one hand, you want to be, you want to be kind of protective of the public. You don't want to expose them to risks. So when something new kind of comes out, you want to write these laws to protect them. But at the same time, it's sometimes it's impossible to really predict what's going to happen. And you may write laws or make regulations that just cause more trouble than it's worth over nothing, right? And it's such a case by case basis that it's really, you can't really say which mindset is kind of better or than the other. And so, a lot of times you'll see laws or you'll see regulators kind of try to skirt the line between these two and try to find kind of the perfect balance. But in reality, it's really hard. And sometimes you may have an incident that occurs that was extremely unlikely to occur, but that of course is going to color everyone's perception and like, oh, why wasn't there a law for this? Why wasn't, there's stuff. And so, these two right here kind of represent the two extremes. And, you can't really say one is better than the other because it's really kind of case dependent. Yeah. But so a lot of the content that I'm using for this part of the course is based on a fairly old textbook on engineering ethics, which was written in the 90s. And so some of the views and some of the commentary in that book is a little bit outdated. Because in this section here, that book basically says that in general, governments tend to go for the more proactive approach. I'm like, oh, that's not really true anymore. But I want to kind of present these two kind of extremes because for a lot of practicing engineers, this doesn't directly affect kind of what you do, but it is going to have an effect, right? And so a lot of times you may have to adjust your work based on maybe a new law that was passed and such and such. Okay. Next week, we're going to be talking about environmental ethics. And so you'll see that, regulatory agencies have played a very big role in terms of, how engineering companies have approached the environment and things like that. And some have been very proactive, some very reactive, and, kind of everything in between. And yeah, there's a very colorful history between engineering companies and the government with regards to the environment.
Do engineering societies put in place a proactive law sort of regulations cover for reactive?
It depends. Sometimes they do. But engineering societies aren't held to the same standards as governments because those are kind of more niche within the engineering community itself. And so I would say kind of in general, it's hard to kind of really say in general because there's kind of been cases of both kind of proactive and reactive, standards being changed. I would say in general, the engineering societies are a little bit more reactive, I would say. Usually they kind of wait for something to kind of blow up or something to kind of happen before they change their standards. But you can find cases on kind of both sides of the fence for this one. Yeah.
Is there any one method that's like significantly better than the other, or are they both equally like?
You mean in terms of these two?
Yeah.
I mean, they both have pros and cons. I mean, you can't really say that one's better than the other one. Especially in a world with like very rapidly developing technology. Like I don't think anyone's claimed it yet, but this is an especially relevant battleground for anyone that tackles artificial intelligence and AI. And so we're very much kind of on the frontier of what AI is and what that's going to look like in the next few years. And so, there's the crowd of people that said, we need to write laws, we need to regulate this, this is going to, end humanity as we know it. But then there's other people that are like, oh, nothing's really happened yet, and so, we should kind of wait and see and write laws to kind of, maybe combat some of the bigger issues that may occur. So yeah, this is a very important kind of, battleground for that right now. And you have people with very strong opinions on both sides. And so, there's pros and cons.
AI hasn't gotten rear end yet.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
I was gonna say, thanks, I appreciate you giving us like detailed explanations when you could just say, it's case dependent. Like you could just give us that short answer.
I mean, it is case dependent, but you know, it is good to kind of think of more specifics in terms of, you know, what's good and what's not. And it's always hard in engineering, because in engineering, you know, we're always on the frontiers of technology, right? That's part of what we do is we develop new technology and we apply it to places that hasn't been done before. And so just by its nature, you know, when you're writing laws about engineering products, you know, there's no precedent a lot of times. And so you don't really know what's the best course of action. And you may think you know at a certain time, but then your opinion probably is going to change, you know, 3, 4, or 5 years from now too. And so ideally, you know, maybe the best approach, and this is my personal opinion too. You know, this does not reflect kind of everything, is to maybe have a system or have a way to be more kind of nimble in terms of, you know, maybe you make rules at a certain point, but we have better ways to kind of change it later on if the situation changes as well. But also there's the case of, you know, maybe you let Pandora out of the box and it's impossible to bring them back in. So, you know, it's tough. It's really tough. One incident, you know, has nothing to do with engineering, but you know, the NBA is kind of, or just sports in general, is going through an issue with like a lot of sports betting nowadays, and so that's one thing where they've kind of let the cat out of the box with sports betting. So they're letting people bet all these kinds of money, and it's causing all these issues. Like, you know, players are getting into betting scandals and things like that, and so you know, now people are having the reactive approach, like, you know, maybe we need to regulate it more, but you can't really put the cat back in the box at that point. You know, it's you know, there's too much money. People are making too much money with the bets. And so, yeah, and it's hard. It's really hard to predict.
Well, any sports, and I get Prize Picks ads almost daily.
It's insane. I'm sick of it. I just want to watch the game. I don't want to bet on anything. I don't want to bet money, but you know, it's everywhere nowadays. I realize that with DraftKings. Yeah. All right. Any other questions on this? All right. Okay, so let's talk about acceptable risk, right? And so this is ideal, right? And so this ideally, you know, the role of the government regulators is to protect the public interest, right? So a risk, according to a government regulator, a risk is deemed acceptable in which protecting the public from harm has been weighted more heavily than benefits to the public. All right. So that's you know, ideally that's kind of the role of the government regulators, is to kind of prevent harms from happening to the public as much as possible. Okay, no matter what the benefits are. Okay, so let's move on to the next thing about, you know, communication. Okay. So, you know, as engineers, you know, we kind of play the very important role of, you know, because we're the masters of this technology, you know, it's also our responsibility to communicate the risks to the public as well. Okay, and that plays a very important role. You know, speaking of government regulators, in helping to shape public policy on these technologies. Okay. So, what you see today is that, different groups of people, depending on what their motivations are, depending on what they stand to benefit from, they all have a different perception and a different way of kind of viewing what is risky or not. And having a successful engineering product or a successful technology kind of involves kind of, making every single party happy, right? The public, the engineers, and the government as well. Okay. Okay. And so part of what we, part of our role as an engineer is to not only develop the technology, but also kind of, inform the public, communicate risks to the public as well as the government's regulators themselves. Okay. And so, how you talk about risk or how you kind of communicate it to different groups of people can really kind of shape their perception of what the technology actually is. Okay. Okay. And I'm not saying this to say that, you should be kind of dishonest, right? You always need to be upfront, right? Because at the end of the day, if people use your technology or use your products and they get hurt, it's going to be your responsibility, right? And so, I'm not telling you to hide any risks or anything like that. Okay. You want to be upfront, you want to be honest, right? But you want to make sure that things are clearly kind of communicated so that there are no misconceptions or misunderstandings that occur in terms of what is actually risky or not. Okay. Okay. So I have some guidelines here that can help, and I think probably we're going to end on this today. Okay. About how you can kind of talk about some of the work that you do to make sure that there's an accurate kind of perception or an accurate kind of communication of risk that is involved, right? And this goes beyond just talking, making laws and regulations about technology. This can also be used. These guidelines can also help kind of explain what you do, maybe to your friends or maybe to your loved ones about, maybe they don't really understand what engineering is, right? So kind of having some guidelines on how to best communicate engineering work is always a useful thing. Okay. All right, so number one. All right. So number one thing is just to be aware that your understanding and perception of what is risky or not can often be very different than how other people view things as risky or not. whenever you say the word risk, right? Even if it's a very minor risk, right? Whenever you bring up the word risk in conversation, it kind of just naturally puts people on edge a little bit, right? And if this is someone that maybe has cares for you a lot, maybe like your friends or your loved ones, when you say that, you're taking on this risk of doing as being part of your work, that's always going to, put people on guard. Okay? So I'll give you an example, right? So usually when engineers mention the word risk, what they really mean is the probability of harm. Okay. 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 But for others, when you say risk, that basically tells them like this is going to happen. It's not a probability of harm, it is harm that's going to happen, right? Okay. So you want to be careful how you use the word risk because it carries different connotations under different things. Okay. Right. Number two. Number two is especially relevant today. And so even though as engineers, we're the subject matter experts, so we know the most about our technology, but just be aware that not everyone is trusting of experts anymore. Okay. Okay. And so I think people kind of have this notion of, you're a professional engineer, you've been working in the field for so long that people just automatically kind of trust what you say. But that's not necessarily the case. And so oftentimes, you may have to kind of, convince people, present evidence and present data to kind of get your point across, right? And so that's one thing to kind of be aware of. And number three, I know it's out of time. This is the last one. But number three is to just always be aware that generally people are very risk adverse. Okay. And so even if there's a small probability of risk happening, they're going to kind of shy away from it. And that's especially true about things that they don't really understand. So the one thing to kind of keep in mind is that as you kind of you know, learn more about a certain technology, you learn better about what kind of risks or not that you can take. But if you don't understand something or if something's kind of unknown to you, then you're naturally just going to be more risk adverse to it because you don't really know what could happen. Right? All right. Any final questions on this? Okay. All right. So we'll pick this back up on Tuesday with more. There's a little bit more of health and safety I want to talk about, and then from there we'll move on to corporate ethics. Right. All right. So thank you guys for coming today. Remember, if you haven't, if your group hasn't chosen a topic yet, please let me know as soon as possible. If you're not in a group by tomorrow, I'm going to put you guys in a group. Okay. So if you're having trouble finding a group, then let me know. If you have a group and you haven't picked a topic, then make sure you send me an email before tomorrow. Otherwise, I'm going to give you a group. I'm going to give you a topic. Okay. All right, so thank you guys for coming today. Hope you guys have a good weekend, and I will see you guys next week.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Fun direction, fun everything. Professor, I have a quick question. So, for the case study that we have here, right? So you know how usually in like organized essays, you have like a quote from like a source and then you describe the source.
Yeah.
Like, in this one, do you still want us to like find a quote from a source? Or do you just want it to be like a?
You don't have to.
I know I read it said you need like a diagram, 2 diagrams or something like that.
Yeah.
Is it fine if I just find like 2 diagrams from the sources I'm looking at? Put them in there, like, and then describe the diagrams
Sure.
to what's happening?
Yeah,
And then
that's
just
fine.
put like the websites I found it from.
Yeah.
On the bottom?
Yeah,
Is that what you want instead of?
Yeah,
like-
you don't need to do quotes or anything like
Okay.
that. In fact, I would rather you kind of take the data and kind of write and discuss it and describe it in your own words.
Okay,
Because once you kind of welcome quotes in, kind of the whole paper just becomes
Quotes.
quotes.
and then
So
describing what's okay.
exactly. So I'd rather you kind of explain it in your own words and then put all your references at the end.
Okay, but like another issue is the diagrams, what did, like, because I'm doing the Ford Pinto ones.
Yeah.
Like, what would a good diagram be?
Like a good diagram, I think, maybe you can show
Sales over time?
sales over time would be a good one. Maybe a diagram of like, maybe the Pinto itself, like maybe comparing the design of the Pinto where the gas tank was compared to like modern design and how that's unsafe. You can kind of just talk about that a bit too.
Okay,
What else can you
and where would I
do?
talk about that? That would be like, I know there's one of the sections, would it be like, could, like the different one, like we could talk about the changes?
Exactly.
Okay,
Yeah.
and the
Yeah.
photo would go underneath there?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Would it also be like, I could put like a photo of like the similarities it shared with other cars during the time?
Sure,
Because I know it
yeah.
was super similar to like the Buick and the.
Yeah. Mhm.
Right, so that would go into the historical content.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, you can talk about that in terms of what kind of design they were aiming
Because I
for.
know they were like strictly competing with like, they were trying to compete with Toyota and stuff like that.
Yeah.
For those super subcompacts,
Mhm.
and that's why they ended up, it was like 2 years development. It was kind of,
Yeah.
I was looking at it, kind of wild.
Yeah, that's great.
68, and then they started manufacturing in 70.
Yeah,
Is that usually how this works, or is it usually?
no, I'm actually not too familiar, but it's definitely longer. I mean, ever since then, it's.
I was gonna
it's
say, 2
definitely-
years seems like, seems like a small amount of time.
Yeah, I mean, ever since then, it's changed a lot.
Okay.
I don't know exactly kind of what the standards are now, but yeah, it's,
Just when I was looking at it, I was like, 2 years, I was kind of just like.
it was a wild time.
That was kind of crazy. And anyways, thank you. That's all I was wondering.
Okay, sure.
Have a good day, man.
Yep.
I was gonna ask, what tech electives are you using?
So I'm most likely gonna be teaching 410, which is a finite element class, and probably optimization, which is 454.
Okay, cool.
I might teach one more elective, but I'm not sure what it is at this point.
Those are the 2 I'm actually interested in.
Oh,
taking
perfect.
Next
Cool.
semester, so, I think 410 may have just filled up.
Yeah, I saw
Our
it. It's
registration
waitlist.
doesn't have to tell Friday.
You
but-
usually, so the thing about 410, I'm not sure about is that we are planning to hire new faculty for next year.
Okay.
And so if it's a new faculty teaching that, they may not be, I mean, they're gonna teach it differently. But because usually when I teach 410, I bring on as many people from the waitlist as I can.
Cool.
But for a new faculty, probably they're not gonna take that many people off the waitlist, just because they're new people. So,
Sure. that makes sense.
So yeah, if you're on the waitlist and it's gonna be me, then I'd say probably have a really good chance.
Okay, okay.
But if it's not me, then it's up to whatever the next.
Yeah,
instructor
410 was the one that was like speaking to me the most.
Yeah.
I was like, okay, let me please do that.
Okay,
Cool, thanks.
yep. What's up?
So I emailed you about the problem I had with enrolling the students.
Yes, yes.
They came back to me.
Uh-huh.
and They told me to fill this out, but then I didn't really know what to fill out for these 2. So I was wondering if you could help me.
I think for the English course, I think probably you would list out the one of your GEs, I think either the A1 or A2 GE.
Okay.
Reading, I think the same thing. So I think your A1, A2 GEs would go here. The math, you would probably just say that, you took calculus only, so calculus 150. Yeah. Let's see. I think that's kind of what they're asking for there is, yeah, for that
This is just the.
transcript. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I think just because you have it on your transcript, so like whatever your A1, A2 course, I would put it here. Then for the math, I would put your math 150A, which kind of shows that you've put into calculus.
And then for like these ones, I don't have to fill out.
Probably not, no. Yeah, I've never seen this form, so. I'm not sure. Okay, so the Cerritos course you wish to take here, that's the circuits. So that's the engineering 215, 215. And then the requisite, you would list out what the requisite course for that is. So I think you actually just have to fill out this. I don't think you have to do anything else. And then I don't know what the requisite course, but you satisfy that for sure. And so you'd list out, what Cerritos requires for circuits, and then you would put out the equivalent course here at Cal State Fullerton. So I think it's probably math. It's probably, I think it's Calc 2, and it's the physics, the electromagnetic circuits, or physics 226. I think you would list out those courses, and it shows on your transcript that you've taken them, that you have. And so then you could take this course. Yeah, so I think you just have to fill out this top section.
Okay.
Yeah.
Leave.
Yep.